Good day, everyone. We are still on our third quarter on our lesson, and our topic for this week is elements and typologies of the community, with the subtopics of social structures, societal dynamics and processes, and societal typologies. But before we proceed to our discussion, let us read the most essential learning competencies. Analyze functions of communities in terms of structures, dynamics, and processes. Differentiate typologies of community. So, societal structures. Communities are composed of multiple layers of people, groups, and structures. As such, they create a network of parallel, intersecting, overlapping, and diverging interactions that it's totally create the social milieu we have at present. This maybe is too complex to fathom when we group communities into generic lumps, but if we were to closely study the existing structures, we can see a more nuanced relationship across actors in these communities. It calls into perspective that needs to carefully analyze the intricacies of structures relative to the complexity of their functions and relationships. So let's proceed to social status and roles. Social status is all about the dynamic of individual identity relative to its social environment. This interaction between the self and the community equates to the individual's stature in said setting. The next is the role. The role is a set of defined and expected behavior or norms that is ascribed to the certain social status. We all have our roles in our communities. We are perceived by others around us as more than just another pile of flesh and bone, but as an individual that has his or her own unique social persona. So let's proceed to the theoretical perspective. First is the functionalism. According to French sociologist Emile Durkheim, there is a glaring difference how we look at individuals and collectives. There is also conceptual difference between looking into the individuals and studying groups of people or communities. Durkheim establishes that what is true to an individual may not be used as a generalization in describing the society he or she is in. In the same light, one cannot generalize that the characteristics of the society as a whole will also be true to its members. Next one is the conflict theory. This perspective was created by Karl Marx, the famous author of Das Kapital and one of the fathers of communism. Central Marx analysis of society is how he sees that almost everything starts with economics. Marx proposes that there is a class conflict from the haves and have-nots. So in his writings, he called out the struggles of the proletariat or the working class from the bourgeois or the owners of trades or means of production. So the working class is the workers that toil to earn their wages. Marx uses the term for industrial workers, which during his time were the only means for an individual to earn within the capitalist structures. Next one is the symbolic interactionism. Symbolic interactionism takes itself away from the other theories and perspective, as it does not look into primary social institutions as the main variable of the study, but rather looks into individuals, their histories, and their perspective. So according to 20th century American philosopher George Herbert, George Herbert Mead, individuals see things differently and their views depends on their own meaning derived from their experience, interactions from people, and the learning they gain from the amalgamated experiences through a course of time. Next one is the social structure. Society is composed of various intermingling structures that continually make interactions, thus creating meaning that center on people. The structure created make up a set of values that stems from the collective consciousness of the individual. This goes to show that society in itself is a social construction or an idea that we have conjured up as a community and believe to be true, thus creating a pattern which we agreed upon and reinforce daily. So a social structure therefore pertains to the interrelations of behavior, roles, and statuses which constitute a stable network of social interactions and relations. Next one is the political structures. A political structure is defined not just by the government but also by groups, other institutions, pressure groups, social movements, and people as part of the political landscape. So the interactions between the political system and other actors result in policy recommendations and adjustments that have direct implications in our lives. Looking into it on stage level analysis, our communities are ascribed by the laws that are enacted by the legislative body. Next one is the economic structures. So societies run on production and consumption. The economic system of modern communities is the market economy. Here, the market is free to produce what to make, how to make it, and who is it for. The current economic system we have is laissez-faire, which does not have any central group or institution that can determine the means of production and control the market as a whole. Here we have to apply the concept of the individual hand with the assumption that we are operating under the idea of scarcity, and thus supply and demand are the determinants of value and cost. Contrasting this idea of a free market is a planned or command market where the state of government determines the means of production. So free market economy also exists based on the idea of competition. The next one is the perfect competition. So perfect competition is an open market that has an indefinite number of buyers and sellers. Because there are so many actors in this market sphere, it will be hard for anyone to take hold of the market, let alone control it by altering price or supply. So during this perfect state of competition, buyers can choose which is best to suit their interests by freely determining which one to buy. Essentially, the products or services that are not competitive in terms of value and cost will be phased out of competition, whereas only the ones that the market deems the best or cost efficient relative to its value will survive and continue to thrive. Next one is the monopoly. Contrasting from perfect competition, pure monopoly is a kind of market where only one individual or company has the capability to produce a much needed goods or services. In this market, the source of goods or services is only from a single source. Thus, consumers have no other choice but to avail them from the single sellers. For many, a monopoly is a clear indicator of a mishandled market because it cannot protect the consumers from sellers who exploit the consumers by raising their prices and therefore lowering accessibility to other buyers. Next is the oligopoly. An oligopoly fundamentally is a market where only a few are able to produce certain goods and services. This sets an unfair advantage since the limited number of producers can easily manipulate supplies and prices for their own interest. If the government is not able to step in and regulate the actions of these producers, then they can easily have the power to fix the markets benefiting their profit motive. Okay, let's proceed to monopolistic competition. Trading between a monopoly and a perfect competition is a monopolistic competition. If we were to simplify this seemingly confusing market type, we can look at it as a state when there are also an infinite number of sellers, but each one is properly differentiated from other competitors in the sphere. Think of it as when you are buying candies. They can essentially the same but different in one way or the other. This differentiation is what sets the candy apart from the rest, and therefore the seller may charge a little more or a little less depending on the offered value addition. Next is the monopsony. A monopsony is such a case since there are no other buyers. The single consumers may control the price and let the producers compete for pricing. So you may think of this when there is a public bidding of a government project. Each producer of a goods or services can vouch their most competitive price to the government. But at the end of the day, the bargaining chip is with the government and it holds the power to lower the price of the good until it matches the seller's price. So yeah, that's the monopsony. Next one is the social-cultural structures. So we have been talking about communities in the sociological standpoint for the past few lessons, and from what we know, social-cultural structures are composed of various institutions, assemblies, and actors. So the interaction generated in between these social variables provides the synthesis from multitudes of discourses that creates the pattern of social norm. To engage and see these patterns, we can look into specific behavioral syntheses that are results of these interactions. Next one is the political trends. From our rich political history, we have gone through several power struggles which, at present, we have left scars that are as fresh as they were before. Needless to say, we as a society hope that the mistakes done in the past would not be forgotten and thus be corrected as we go along and create a better future for the next generation. Thus, many of our institutions vouch for a free and liberal society that espouses human rights, individual freedom, and market competition. Next one is the cultural trends. People and governments open up for the international community. This resulted in political and cultural interactions and exchange of goods and knowledge among the states. This paved the way for the appreciation of other ways of life coming from outside the state. If you look around stores in shopping malls, you can see foreign clothing brands competing with local brands. You may identify cultural influences from the style, cut, or form of the article of clothing on display. The next is the economic trends. The Philippine economy is regarded as one of the most resilient in Asia. With a stable monetary and fiscal policy, the Philippines has set one of the best examples of the developing market economy. Despite the relatively volatile economic condition, which is often affected by political instability, the Philippine market was able to withstand multitudes of challenges from the Asian financial crisis during the 1990s to the market crashes, credit crunch, and housing bubbles of its biggest economic partner, the United States, in the 2020s. In the 2000s, the Philippine economy has conservatively protected itself despite a temptation to borrow, overreach, and end up with a fiscal deficit, avoiding the scenario where the government does not have funds to cover its operations or go into austerity measures to survive. Next one is the technological structures. In the current fast-paced society, we need to advance critical thought and innovation as one of the most important governance initiatives. Research has been undervalued in the Philippines for too long to a point that many of our latest discoveries and innovations were overlooked and ended up underdeveloped or underutilized. This is largely because the support for our inventors and scientists are relatively hard to come by. Even the incentives for the development of local technologies are mostly given to private companies and are not state-sponsored because research is not in the priority of our government. The development of local products has left local industries to survive on their own. Next one is the environmental structures. Our communities have been risked due to the most recent calamities brought about by climate change and atrocious urban management. Various institutions should spearhead concerted effort to protect the environment and mitigate the effect of natural calamities and disasters. So we have to remember that the environment is everybody's concern and it is responsibility of each member of the community. In light of the most recent floods such as Typhoon Ondoy in 2009 and Yolanda in 2013, there was much debate as to the cause of these disasters, and these are finger pointing by the officials. Yeah. Okay, so let's proceed to societal dynamics in processes. So people make dynamic exchange and interaction that give life and vibrancy to our communities. Processes operationalize these changes into new ideas and solutions to be applied in satisfying or pressing our needs and wants. So social exchange and rational choice theory. Society cannot exist without interaction among its members. People, by nature, are social beings that are independent with each other. Individuals seek to exchange ideas and socialize with their kin or members of the community. Establishing social networks is one of the most important activities that are necessary for communities to grow. All social beings, while unique to each other, are influenced by one particular motivation, and this is self interest. Self interest is driven by our evolutionary tendencies to survive. Competition and conflict. In a competition, there are various actors that vie for limited number of opportunities present, or in some instances, only one can be selected. Society, in the same way, has the same finite opportunities that can only few can survive. In real life, we are in constant competition not only against our peers but also against the very institutions we are in. We fight to survive the competition in our own way, resulting in conflicts. Next is the cooperation and accommodation. Cooperation happens when people come together and pitch in to achieve a common task or goal. This union is essential for groups to achieve goals that are almost impossible to achieve when done by one actor. So, between conflict and cooperation, there is what we call the state of accommodation. Similar to a compromise, it represents neutrality in social interactions, whereby the individuals merely ascribes to an agreement to keep the status quo. Cooperation and accommodation have different effects on a community. Cooperation, on one hand, provides the necessary communal spirit that motivates people to contribute and volunteer. The support coming from individual enhances the community's chances of survival. Accommodation, on the other hand, may cause the community to be complacent regarding stance on issues and concerns. The lack of participation may result in more social maladies such as despondency or apathy, which will render the community inefficient in the long run. So let's proceed to social change. Society is ever changing. It is never static, since the people that make up the society are in nature continually changing in terms of their interactions on a certain milieu. Social change refers to the fluctuations or deviations in the order of society. Changes that affect its institutions, norms, or culture are all variables that can affect social change. So factors affecting social change are the structures and institutions that all contribute to the ongoing calibration of norms in our society. Examples of these critical structures are politics, economics, cultures, technology, and the environment. Changes in these structures will drastically alter the way of life of communities and other actors. So, these are the perspectives of social change. The evolutionary theory. This explains that society follows an evolutionary development from a simple commune and then moves towards more complex systems. Next one is the conflict theory. This explains that conflict between the holders of power and the disenfranchised are the drivers of social change, and conflicts is a necessary characteristic in social relations. The last one is the functionalist theory. This explains that the set of roles and statuses hold social balance, and therefore any change in the scheme will have repercussions on the functions of other roles and statuses. So let's proceed to community structure, process, and dynamics. Community structures is presented by the social hierarchies that are inherent to each collective. The various social statuses and roles all are part of the social system we are all in. all members of the community, from doctors, lawyers, firemen to the students, live by these statuses and roles. So, for community dynamics, the actors are the individuals, civil society groups, pressure groups, and movements who all contribute to the communities in the creation of meaning. So in the interface of these actors, we create networks that provide cohesion and order to our social environment. Different kinds of interactions, however, can either help to jeopardize the harmony in the society through cooperation, conflict, or by simply accommodating current norms. So let's go to the societal typologies. The last topic: rural, suburban, and urban communities. The area we live is another classification of communities. Scholars see the value of looking into the different geographic locations of where human settlements are to categorize community by virtue of population, space, and accessibility. First one is the urban. Urban communities are settlements that are highly congested because of the dense population that can reach within a limited space. Due to the volume of people, buildings and other structures are near each other, and economic centers, schools, and leisure areas are very near factories, office spaces, and markets. Some people are living in high-rise buildings because of the limited available space in the area. Next one is the suburban. Suburban communities are areas that tread between urban and the rural communities. These settlements are located in the outskirts of urban areas and are less dense than urban areas, or are composed of medium-sized population. Suburban areas are mostly filled with houses, subdivisions, and private estates rather than factories and shops. Access to school and markets are farther than in urban areas. The buildings are low to mid-rise, and people live in houses with large living spaces and usually with yards. So rural communities are located. So next one is the rural. Rural communities are located in the countryside. The houses are far from each other, and the density of people living here is the least from the three. Because there are less people, access to markets and schools are far and requires a long drive or different forms of transport. Livelihood are mostly from farming and livestock raising. For an area to be classified as urban, it has to first fulfill the requirements such as high number of inhabitants, the type of industries, and use of land. There are different positive and negative aspects for each type. The problems and challenges are also unique for each community type, as seen in some examples below. So in urban, there are pollution, high cost of living, and high crime rate. In suburban, limited economic activity, and in rural, lack of access to basic services and underdeveloped market. Okay, let's proceed to the last one, the formal and informal sectors. So when we think of formal and informal as words, we conjure up pictures of order and formity of formal, which contrasts with a backdrop of near anarchy for informal. But the words actually classify more than conformity or the lack of it. In the study of community development, these two are categorizations of sectors that embody assemblages sharing common economic traits. So for formal sector, These sectors compose of establishment, businesses, and other enterprises that are legal based on their compliance to government requirements such as license. Because they have successfully attained all requirements, they, alongside their workers and customers, are continually being supervised and protected by the government and its policies. In exchange, they follow the regulations and also are taxed by the state. Next one is the informal sector. Those who are part of the informal sector lack the requirements and license from the government. Because they fail to register, they tend to disregard the regulations and policies put up by the government. Thus, they are not also taxed on their income and real properties. Since they are not supervised, their workers and customers, in the case of business establishment, are also not protected, thus limiting their bargaining rights once they make a demand. This sector is often described by economists as the shadow economy because it exists behind state supervision. So that's all for this week. If you have any questions and clarifications regarding to our topic, don't hesitate to PM me on Messenger. Thank you for listening. Have a great day. See you next week.